everyone. My name is Nadine Bayer, Academy Manager at A4S, and thank you so much for joining our webinar on Transform Your Decisions, Strategic Planning, Budgeting, and Forecasting today. Please note we are recording the webinar for others, and it will be made available on the A4S YouTube channel and on our website as on-demand webinar afterwards. These monthly Sustainability in Action webinars are part of the A4S Academy, which I know many of you are currently actually participating in. The Academy is a program designed to empower and equip senior finance professionals with the skills needed for their businesses to succeed in the face of environmental and social risks and opportunities. These webinars are open to both Academy and non-Academy participants. Everyone is, of course, welcome. In terms of the agenda for today, so we will start with a panel discussion with our external speakers from South West Water and Elia. Then we have a Q&A with you, the audience, so you can ask away all the questions. And then we will have an introduction to the A4S content on strategic planning, budgeting, and forecasting before we're wrapping everything up. In addition to the question and answer time, you can, of course, ask questions freely in the chat function throughout the webinar. Throughout the webinar today, we will also be running some polls to allow you to interact with us and to share your input. If you would like to earn CPE or CPD points for attending today's webinar, please ensure that you respond to all of these polls, as this is a prerequisite in order to give you the credits. The learning objectives of this webinar. So we hope that after completing today's course, you will be able to articulate the business benefits of integrating sustainability into strategic planning, budgeting, and forecasting, and that you are able to translate the experience and learnings from others, from practical examples shared during the webinar, to your own work. I'm very, very pleased to announce today's speakers. As I mentioned to you before already, it will be Louise Rowe, Finance Director at South West Water, part of Tenon Group, and Pierre-Henri Hedin, Head of Sustainability at Elia. You will also be hearing from the A4S team. With me today are Helen Slinger, Executive Director, and Catherine Jackson, Technical Advisor, and of course myself. To find out a little bit about you, I will run a poll question now to see which department you're actually coming from. Are you from finance, sustainability, strategy, risk, or other? Very interesting. I can already see we have a lot of people from finance today, a few of you are from sustainability. And it doesn't really seem that anyone from strategy or risk has joined us today. Great, thank you. So without further ado, Helen.
Thank you, Nadine, hello, everybody, and a particular welcome to Louise and Pierre-Henri, our speakers today. So just to give a little bit of background on your organisations before we make a start. So Elia are a transmission system operator for high voltage electricity, and they operate in Belgium and Germany. Their main activities include managing grid infrastructure, managing the electrical system, and facilitating the market. Their mission statement, to lead the way in the successful European energy transition towards a sustainable world through innovation and cooperation, really demonstrates their commitment to sustainability, which is integrated into their corporate strategy. And about Tenon Group. Tenon is focused on the responsible and sustainable provision of essential utility services and environmental infrastructure. Their core business is South West Water, which is a water and wastewater service provider operating in the southwest of the UK. And sustainability is a common thread through their long-term strategic planning, their 5-year business planning, and their annual budgeting process. They've made sustainability commitments publicly, which ensure that sustainability remains a key priority through their planning and delivery activities. So we're here today to give a little bit of insight into the more practical side of our A4S Essential Guide to Strategic Planning, Budgeting and Forecasting, and talking to our colleagues here from Elia and from Tenon to give us a few insights into what happens in practice. So drawing out some of the key themes around strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting, in particular around governance and performance management. So we'll just be exploring those different elements with Pierre-Henri and with Louise. So just to start with a couple of questions for each of you, give our audience a little bit of the context. So Pierre-Henri, can you tell us a bit more about Elia Group and share some details on how your role was established and what your remit is as head of sustainability?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, Helen, so Elia is the transmission system operator. So for those who are not familiar with the energy sector, it's basically into the value chain, the actor which is between the producer, so really the power plants, and the distribution grid. So what we call the distribution system, who in turn delivers the electricity to SMEs and to your homes. So we are the actor in between, responsible, as Helen said, for the very high voltage grid. So basically, we are today active in Brussels, in Belgium, so based in Brussels, so responsible for the entire Belgian system operator. And we are also active in Germany when we operate, I would say, 1/4 of the electricity grid in Germany. Beyond these two countries at the moment, we have also discussion to expand beyond, especially in the Nordics with, for example, discussion with Denmark at the moment to see how we could connect Denmark to Belgium through the sea, and then increase the interconnection capacity between the north and the center of Europe. Order of magnitude, so it's a company of 2,500 people, so I would say modest side, especially compared to the US. Market cap 7.3 billion. So next question was, how was my role established? And that's true, that's a new role in the organization, didn't exist in the past before. And I think it really came from the observation from both finance and the environment team that their teams needed to collaborate much more frequently than before. Couple of examples, I would say, whether it's through the EU taxonomy, the requirement from ESG rating agencies, or even the willingness to really raise the sustainability challenges internally, the environment team and finance team really had to collaborate, but not only more frequently, but also more thoroughly, so much more in details, deep questions. And so basically, based on this observation of group CFO and chief community relation officer, so decided to create this position. So at the intersection between the environment team and the finance team, with direct reporting to the group CFO and the chief relation officer, with really the idea of bridge the gap between the two worlds. And so, yeah, the role is really to facilitate the integration of sustainability within the finance department on, for example, topic, again, EU taxonomy, the green financing. So how can we select, I would say, relevant KPI, sustainability KPI to link your financial instrument when you raise money on the debt market, for example. All of these questions needs to have, I would say, both a good knowledge of sustainability and the environment, but having an in-depth knowledge of how a finance team works, whether it's, you know, M&A, controlling, SP&A. And so, yeah, this is why they decided to create this position. And yeah, this is where I am.
Great, thank you. So right at the intersection between sustainability and finance. Thank you. And sure. So Louise, not dissimilarly, but getting there by a different route. You know, you've been the finance director at South West Water for a number of years, and you've recently taken on the role of ESG director. So can you maybe tell us a little bit about that new role, how it's come about, and how it links into your strategic planning?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Helen, and thank you, everybody. I'm really pleased to be here to talk to you today. I suppose one of the, I suppose it's probably a mix, really, as how we've ended up in the role we've had. As Pierre said, you know, bridging that gap between finance and sustainability has something that I've been involved in with a long time, particularly with A4S. And I think over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, that link, and companies realizing that the link between finance and sustainability has to be stronger. And often in businesses, finance is always is very much the focus. They're at the heart of the business usually. They're ones that often drive kind of projects and change, and they're looking at performance, and they're looking at driving strategy as well, along with obviously other parts of the business, very much at the core. And I think that actually, along with the changes that are coming with sustainability, as mentioned, financing and how people are looking at companies now, has moved on so dramatically in the last 5 years. And I think then sustainability now and finance are probably more natural bedfellows than maybe they have been in the past. And really, it was a good opportunity to be able to link the two together. And it also happened at a time when Pennon had previously been a kind of a company that had waste and UK water assets, and were focused very much now more on the UK water industry. So my role as South West Water Finance Director linked probably more directly then with Pennon's ESG agenda, and being able to really push forward our sustainability. So it absolutely, and I know there's some other questions coming on in terms of how we do things, so I won't try and answer them all now, but I think one of the things that has changed and has shifted in our business, and I think in business in general, is the fact that sustainability now has to be more at the heart of your strategic planning. I think maybe in the past, sustainability has been something that was done to kind of your CSR, to kind of show that you were being a responsible business, and putting in some maybe interesting community elements, or how are you, looking at your maybe carbon levels, whereas actually now it definitely has to be embedded in your strategic thinking. And I think putting finance and sustainability, whether it's in one role like we have, or whether it's actually having a role like Pierre, where there is a clear link between two teams to try and push that forward, I think that's really just an evolution of where we've been moving to over the last few years.
Great, thank you. And coming on to that, how you do things, Louise, can you give us a little bit of an overview of the process that you go through when you're setting your strategic priorities as an organisation, and how is sustainability being considered and integrated as part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as a water company, and previously Pennon obviously having a waste company, but as a water company, it's probably a lot easier to think about maybe the E and the S of ESG when you're talking about your business, because a lot of the just general activities we have done and we do are very much focused on the environment, and also customers and our communities are really at the heart of our underlying business. So I think some companies like ourselves are at an advantage where those things are naturally almost embedded in the business, in terms of what we need to do and what we need to achieve. So that kind of having to maybe think differently has already been there, because that's part of our DNA. But in terms of setting our strategic priorities, I think we take those two things into consideration very much, and we set them based on what our long-term view and vision is. So, one of our strategic priorities, if we want to be an environmental leader, and I think that's a priority. We're not there in all of the areas, but it is that's where we want to be. We want to make sure that we're as efficient and effective as possible, and we want to really have sustainable growth. And then all of those that's our kind of strategic priorities for the organisation. And actually, when you kind of unpick them, you see that there is quite a lot of, we'll call it sustainability, but there's quite a lot of kind of metrics and activities and drivers that really are kind of sit well alongside those strategic priorities that link with sustainability and our ESG approach. And I think one of the things that we are doing more of is then how do you kind of link sustainability through from what are your strategic priorities, and then how do they really flow through into what you're setting as your kind of key activities, key strategic direction. And I think that's something that is really important, is maybe to have your key priorities, but they can't sit independently of your activities, but also where you want to go from a sustainability perspective. And I think the board as well is very important in driving that agenda. I know, we've always said in the past, getting this sustainability and finance and really embedding those two things together only happen when you have willing participants. And as Pierre would attest, having two people who are driving and supporting and wanting to go in the same direction is kind of how you get the board as well to be on board with that.
Yeah. So really bringing together the sustainability into the core strategy rather than having two separate strategies sounds like a really essential part. Fantastic. Thank you, Louise. So come back to you, Pierre-Henri. So at Elia, you've recently established a sustainability governance framework, I understand. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that framework and how it's used to help achieve the group strategic priorities.
Yeah, good. And I would say, I think I'm going to start with what Louise said. I'm going to be very practical. So I don't mean to give you a very high level view on what sustainability governance should be. There are good books and articles from McKinsey, BCG, Bain around that. So my goal here is really to share with you, should that be inspiring for you, what we did and why we did it, instead of staying very very general. So I think, yeah, I believe to answer your question, Hélène, the starting point for us in order to define how to set a really relevant and powerful sustainability governance was really to start from the vision of the company and really know what we want to achieve at the end of the day. And so you mentioned it in the introduction, our vision as a TSO is really to enable successful energy transition for a sustainable world. And so what we did, I'm going to use kind of a funnel to get to the answer, but starting from this vision, we kind of translated our strategic pillars, so really our corporate strategy, into 8 strategic ambitions for the entire group, all countries included. And one of them was ensure sustainability in the way we operate our business. And so the next question, of course, was, okay, that's a beautiful sentence, but how can we implement that in the organization? And so to turn this strategic ambition into really concrete action into the business, we define what we call our corporate sustainability program called Act Now, which basically covers the 3 letters of the ESG framework. So we have 2 dimensions around the E, 2 dimensions around the S, and 1 dimension around the G. And so next question was, so now that we have this program, that we know what we want to achieve, how can we make sure that it is fully integrated and executed in the business? And this is where we are today. So it's not behind us still. We are really in the middle of this implementation. But I would say our goal is really to make sure that sustainability objectives are really embedded in the business. And so, in other words, that's to say that we don't want a sustainability strategy, which is on top of what the company is normally doing. We want sustainability to be embedded in every single activities of the organization. So making our strategy sustainable and not having an additional sustainability strategy. And this mindset really drove the way we define our governance framework. So the choice that we made is to have one central and light sustainability team, but with business representative in every single entities of the organization. We want the business to own the strategic ambition of the organization. Sustainability for us is not something we want as the sustainability team to push as a policeman, but we want the business to absorb the sustainability concept, to understand why, really the why, and also the financial reason, why are we doing sustainability practices. There is, beyond also the environmental considerations, there are fundamental finance, economic reasons for that. So our role as sustainability team is really to bring this awareness to every single business line and then design our governance to make sure that they own the initiative, that they incorporate this objective in their strategic planning. So basically that sustainability is incorporated in their business roadmap. How did we do that? We follow a 5-step approach. The first was really to reinforce the role of the board of directors, really to make sure sustainability is a topic at company level. Then second, we got the executive sponsorship of the CFO, who therefore communicated our strategic ambition to the capital market during a capital market day in May. Then we added sustainability in the variable remuneration of the executive committee with a significant weight, so that we are all on the same boat. As I said, step 4, making sure that the business owns the initiative. So we really leave the lead of the sustainability-driven project in the business. Our team is there to consolidate that at group level and making sure that we are on time in the execution of the sustainability strategic planning across the entire organization. 5-step, that's what basically I described. So my role as really a facilitator to make that happen. So this is, the governance framework we implemented. We are really in the middle of the implementation. Is it the only solution? Probably not. But we believe that that's the best for us, given the fact that we want sustainability to be embedded in the business. So happy to chat more after the call.
Great, thank you for sharing all that, Pierre-Henri. And just as a reminder to our audience, of course, there is an opportunity for you to ask our speakers questions coming up. So to keep those coming through, I can see them hitting me now. So Louise, coming to you next. We talked obviously about the strategy and how you make that integrated. So what about when you come to set short and long-term corporate-wide targets for those strategic priorities? How does that side of things work? And how do you measure performance against those targets? And really importantly, making sure that information gets to the right decision makers. Yeah.
So I think when we have to start at a bit of a macro level and then kind of come down into the detail, I think. So as a water company, we are particularly long term in our probably long-term vision and particularly as an infrastructure business. So we have a kind of 25, 30-year plan that we review. And in that, we kind of set out 8 outcomes that we want for our customers and the environment. And that actually, a lot of that is very much embedded within our kind of the core ESG elements of it. So some of it focused on environmental and customers and our social responsibility side of things. And then we take that, and we also have, as a regulated business, a 5-year business plan. And that 5-year business plan then almost disseminates that longer term kind of vision, a longer term kind of view of where we want to be into a plan that is then for 5 years. And that actually has to have, as part of our regulatory requirements, some really specific and quite detailed targets that are some environmentally linked, some are customer linked, and actually some of them in the last 2 price reviews have also been had some environmental ones that are quite diverse. So we've had one on biodiversity, for example, which has actually been quite a change for us. So what it is really doing is looking at those elements, those metrics, and then putting those into some 5-year plans and 5-year targets. And I think it's those then that we use to really target performance and target delivery. And we as a water company kind of have to do that as part of our regulatory framework. So in some senses, it's, you know, maybe easier for us because we have almost a regulatory framework to do that. But that doesn't actually mean that they are all linked to sustainability, or that they all are the only metrics that we have for sustainability. And I think one of the key things that I have found in coming into this role and almost revisiting our ESG position is that when you're looking at setting your corporate-wide targets for ESG, is don't kind of look at it separately to the activities of the business. So we have a wealth of activities and performance measures and performance metrics that we're having to do from a regulatory perspective, or things that we've always kind of monitored and measured in terms of our performance. Start from there. Don't go down a route of saying, okay, well, that's what we're doing as a business, but over here we need some sustainable objectives, and we need some sustainable metrics, and we need some sustainable targets, because actually they are they're one and the same. And that's where that's been a bit of a change in the last kind of year, and how we are setting our targets going forward is actually to fully embed them within what are the business activities, rather than just coming at it from a okay, what are the sustainable targets? And I think that is how you then bring that forward to decision makers, and bring that forward into kind of the governance structures that Pierre was talking about. You know, we want to use these sustainability targets to make the right decisions. You know, how do you decide? We make a lot of infrastructure investment and big infrastructure investment. How do you decide what is the right thing to invest in if you're only looking at pounds? You know, you might have something over here and something over there, and they may cost exactly the same, but one might have increased biodiversity, and one might have, I don't know, a real social benefit to the local communities. And that, using those sustainability metrics and measures to make the right decision, is how you really are embedding ESG and sustainability into your decision making. And I think it's something that then wraps up to the tie level that says, okay, how are you performing on an ESG perspective overall? And you talked about you know, decision makers and investors. That's what investors are getting more and more interested in. So Pierre made the point that actually, you know, going out and explaining to people sustainability and making them understand why we're doing this, why are you asking us to do it, because there is a real financial benefit for it. That is absolutely evident now with the way that our debt and way banks and some of those debt investors are really looking at ESG metrics and the ESG credentials of a business, and we have a sustainable financing framework which actually sets all of the targets that we're going to work towards. And then also your equity investors, again, are really interested in this. I've done some investor relations in the past, and, you know, never seen anybody talk about it probably five years ago, definitely at the front of people's minds now when it comes to investment decisions. So not only have you got it kind of as wanting to set your long-term kind of corporate goals and supporting your strategic priorities and maybe where you want to position yourself, you know, within public, but also you have a real financial imperative to look at sustainability going forward. And it's great that that's obviously always a good hook, that you link the finance and the sustainability together.
Great. So making sure that those targets are linked through to the core business, core of what you do, but extending those out to think about your other stakeholders. So you mentioned your investors, you mentioned your debt investors, you mentioned your customers as well. And so that's really clear. Thank you. So Pierre-Henri, I guess moving on from what Louise said when she touched on customers there, moving over to the more of the procurement side. I understand you have a bit of a focus on green procurement and are looking at the introduction of your internal carbon price as part of as a budgeting technique around that. So I guess it'd be great if you could share just a little bit more about that internal carbon price and how you're envisaging that will help you achieve your strategic priority around green procurement.
Yeah, sure. So indeed, within our climate change dimension, so in our corporate sustainability program, one of the key objectives is basically to transition towards a carbon neutral value chain as well, both for the equipment that we buy from our suppliers, but also for the works that we are doing. When you install, for example, new pylons to add a new transmission line in the grid network, you need to do a lot of work. And so the scope is really equipment on one hand and works on the other hand. So now when you want to add CO2 considerations in your procurement, and again, I'm going to be very practical here, you basically add an extra dimension in a multivariable optimization function. So today, the way procurement works, they optimize, I would say, the number of suppliers that we have based on several criteria. You can have safety, the price, of course, also the delivery time that the supplier promised. So it's already like a multivariable system. And then you come and you add the CO2 in it. So that's something you need to keep in mind. We are not talking about CO2 only. CO2 is included in this global framework. And so the challenge is how to assign the good weight to all of these parameters. And what we did realize, one possible mistake when you implement an internal carbon price is to, especially in your procurement department, is to look at your scope 3 emissions only. And that's a mistake, because actually you need, when you start this exercise, you need to realize that actually your scope 1, 2, and 3 emission are actually interdependent. So putting an objective, a target of scope 3 emission doesn't make sense. Concrete example, so in our industry, we buy a lot of power transformers. So it's a big equipment. And so if you want to reduce your scope 3 emissions, what you want to do is basically reduce the amount of material which is used to manufacture this equipment. On the other side, you may have larger equipment, but whose the energy efficiency is much better, meaning the electricity losses will be lower along the lifetime of the equipment. So they basically need less electricity of the lifetime. This is your scope 3. So basically here, scope 2 and scope 3 go in other direction. Either you go to an equipment which is more efficient, energy efficient, you reduce your scope 2 emission, but at the same time, it's a larger equipment, require a larger amount of copper, for example, and so you increase your scope 3 emissions. And that's why I say this is really an holistic view on your CO2 emission. So please don't just set target on scope 3. It doesn't make sense to achieve your ambition of really reduce the CO2 emission of your system. So that was the first thing I wanted to share with the panel today. The other thing is internal carbon price. You have the adjective internal. So meaning it's not a real cost. So this cost is not paid by you, neither it is by your suppliers. It's just a way, I would say, to reorganize the ranking of your different suppliers, favorizing those who are more sustainable. So that's something you have to have in mind. And so what's the best way to do so? I think we decided to focus on two parameters, the delta capex and the TCO, so total cost of ownership. Mm-hmm. And so basically, based on a certain carbon price, we see how the ranking flipped when you introduce CO2. And then on one hand, if the supplier is not the same, might be the same, the best player could be actually the most sustainable already. So I'm not saying it changes every time, but if it changes, then we assess the delta capex and also the impact on the TCO. And you may have a lower TCO because actually, if the supplier was not the winner in the past because it was not good enough on one of the other criteria, price, safety, the fact that you include CO2 in your analysis and you assign a price to CO2 emission across the lifetime of the equipment, then this equipment can become more financially attractive than the others. So these are the two parameters. And then we define a max on the delta capex. And so we play with the internal carbon price and see, as long as we stay in this range of delta capex, we kind of optimize the carbon price to minimize the total cost of ownership. So that's how we have implemented it. We are not dead yet. Okay, so again, we are trying. So we don't cover our entire supply chain at the moment. And the objective, one of the objectives, and the one that we committed to AFRS as well, is to do this exercise for 60% of our spend by the end of 2023. So in the next 2 years, we really want to cover at least 60%, and then over the next 5 years, have our total spend, I would say, portfolio covered by this methodology.
Well, thank you for sharing as you go on that journey.
Yeah, sure.
So Louise, I guess in terms of your strategic priorities and how they link through to your budgeting process, can you tell us maybe a little bit about that? And do you use carbon pricing or something different?
Okay, thanks. So as I mentioned, we kind of have our very long-term vision, and then we have our 5-year business plan. And then that is disseminated into annual budgeting. Now, we have been on a journey with trying to embed sustainability within our budget processes for many years, and again, and we're still not there. So I think that's one thing probably just to say to those that are listening is we're not there. We've been doing this for quite a long time, and we are still developing and still kind of making sure that these links are here for sustainability. So please don't think that I have all the answers, and that what we say and what we're looking for and what we're driving and how we're pushing it forward doesn't necessarily mean that everything happens in that way. So we'd just say, this is a much longer journey, for even though we started it a little while ago, it is still an ongoing journey. So we'd just kind of make that point. I think the way that we look at how those strategic priorities link to budgeting is because of the outcomes framework that we have, and because of those very clear targets that we have set from a regulatory perspective, there is a bit more of within the business probably thinking about what do I need to do to deliver those targets. And because we're in that mindset already, because of the regulatory change and the activities within the business, actually when you then try and layer on some of the other sustainable activities that maybe aren't in the core kind of 44 regulatory outcomes, actually people are slightly more understanding about that idea of what do I need to do, what do I need to actually deliver this target. And this target might be a new sustainability target to say tree planting. We've committed to plant 250,000 trees. really, really practical, really, really obvious, very, very measurable. But there are others around communities and communities engagement. How do you actually know, and how do you measure the benefit that, say, setting up a community fund might have? And we're not, and as I said, we are still working through how you actually then value or measure the benefit and the ESG benefit you get from some things, and then our next step is to consider that for the capitals and into then, you know, potential valuation. But I think from a budgeting perspective, it is making sure that you're really aware and clear on your targets. So what are the targets, the sustainability targets, or for any, to be fair, any target, being really clear on what that is, and what do you need to do as an activity to get there, and how is that constrained by a budget, and how do you push and pull some of those things? Which do you think are most important? Which do you think have, you know, which ones are kind of definitive things you have to do? What are the things that you would like to do? And also, how are you then pushing and pulling from a budget perspective? Because obviously, as we know within finance, there is never just there is never an unending pot of money, and you have to really focus on the key things that you're doing. And that's where constantly bringing it back to your strategic priorities and having what probably term a golden thread through all of those activities. So you will see in our long-term plans that there are themes and there are targets and there are goals that flow all the way through from, you know, a 25-year plan all the way through to budgeting. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't change and shift, but they are all anchored in our strategic objectives in order to get there. And I think, you know, one of the big things that is changing that we are looking at is we've recently published as part of the water industry, we have signed up to net zero by 2030. That's very specific what net zero means, which scope is it, which in, what's out, what, etc. But we have committed to that and published our net zero plan in July. That's actually meant, you know, the whole point around carbon pricing or reflecting what the carbon impact of your decisions is really important. We can't commit to doing something by 2030 if actually when you come to your decision making and your budgeting, you aren't taking that into account. And I think that's the decision. It's really interesting that Pierre are looking at it from a procurement perspective, and how do you, you know, get your suppliers to be more efficient and more, you know, or aimed for net zero and reduce your carbon for your scope 3, but also what do you need to do as a business in order to get there? And we have set some quite key targets that relate not only to renewable generation, but also to reducing our kind of general carbon impact and a bit more of a, call it sustainable living, but actually how do you reduce the carbon you use within your business? That's a whole new thing that's kind of come about in the last year or so. Mm-hmm. And that's where you know, new things like that come into your budgeting processes, but they're not at odds with your strategic priorities and your strategic aims. If they were, you would probably want to rethink whether they are you know, important, whether they are the right thing, or whether you are going in a slightly different strategic direction. But I think the way that you put this into your budgeting process and practically, so taking it down a bit of a level, is you make sure that everybody is clear about what targets you're wanting to put in, clear about the why, and also that they are bought into them and that they are their targets. So there is no point in kind of, and this is, you know, something that found over the years, is giving somebody a target without them actually really owning it and without having somebody to own it, is very likely to end in non-delivery. So it is so important to make sure that you maybe co-create some of those targets, co-create those with the business. As Pierre said, it's not making sure it's not just a push, it is a push and a pull, and making sure that you have owners and owners for your sustainability kind of metrics within budgets is really important. In the same way, no one's going to deliver a budget if they're not clear what that budget is and they have ownership of it. Nobody's going to deliver sustainability targets if they don't own them and know what they are and what they're doing.
Absolutely agree.
That's really important.
Thank you, Louise. And there's within our essential guide for strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting, there is more information, more guidance on both carbon pricing, but also on capitals accounting and other ways of budgeting that Louise touched on there. So thank you very much for all of our audience who have sent questions in. Before we come to those, I do have a question for you. So if I can ask my colleagues to pop that on the screen. So based on what we've heard from our panelists so far, which of the following do you think would be key considerations when integrating sustainability into corporate strategy? So developing the vision and mission, assessing and mitigating risks, performing data and information analysis, preparing and communicating management information, the management information systems themselves, and identification of opportunities for growth. Great. So I guess this is what's important when integrating sustainability, and we've specifically focused here on the role of finance. And well done to our panelists for bringing so many of these into their responses during the course of the questions that you've been answering. So thank you. So Louise, so Pierre-Henri, I guess just reflecting on that role of finance there. How much does that resonate with you? How much of that are you seeing at Elia Group? Are those reflective of the key areas for you?
There is something we, according to me, we haven't mentioned yet, is also the crucial role of controlling in the finance team. And because sustainability is a transversal topic, just like GDPR or digital transformation was, they really affect transversally every aspect of the organization. And it's very difficult actually to achieve your target by working in silos. And so this is where I see, and we are in this exercise at the moment, budgeting exercise, the important role that controlling has to play in this exercise. Controlling needs to be aware of the strategic ambition, the strategic target of the company. Controlling needs to be able, in its consolidation phase, to look at the budget they receive from the different departments, and then have also a critical view on has every single department included sustainability and the sustainability objective, whether it's E, S, or G, but in their budget. So controlling for me now, it's really much more than, Excel files, GAAP, arbitrage. There is a real analysis of the figures and making sure that your controllers have a good view, are really business partners, I would say, from the business. So I would say from an HR perspective also, I think, and I have the pleasure to work with such a person today, but facilitate some move from the business to your controlling department makes a lot of sense. Like I'm working with someone who really worked in infrastructure before, and she's not my controller, but this person has really a dual view on what she's supposed to do from a controlling standpoint, and she understands the reality of the business on the other hand. And so she has this critical view on, looking at the budget, looking at the pictures, looking at the figures. Are we able to use that budget to achieve our strategic goal? So that's something we haven't mentioned, but I think to all of the finance professionals in this call, I think controlling needs to have a crucial role to be aware of the initiatives and also being part of your sustainability governance. I would say, to make sure that when there are some arbitrage to do, controlling is there, and then at the end, CFO comes in if needs to have a stronger arbitrage that cannot be decided at controlling level. But that's something I wanted to share with you that I'm experiencing at the moment.
Great, thank you. And Louise, I guess in your role as finance director, you get to see really the extent to which sustainability is embedded across that strategic planning, budgeting, and forecasting process. So, what is the role of finance within that in terms of bringing sustainability in? And I don't know, maybe you've seen some change in your role over time as sustainability has become more integrated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Phil's right in the sense of the controlling part of finance, I think is actually something that is quite useful in really embedding sustainability in targets and performance and then bringing it into the budgeting. So I think finance has a unique position within our business, but I think in a number of businesses that actually it works across the whole business. And you might end up with some elements of the business are only looking at one particular area, but finance, and particularly those that operate within the business for, say, business partnering, whether they're centralised and partnering in that way, or whether they sit within those areas, finance has a huge kind of reach within a business. And I think that is why having finance involved within sustainability is the only way you make change. So I think we've had questions and things in the past around, well, how do you balance sustainability with the financial budgets when people have only a certain pot of money? And that's where the finance teams actually can help, in the sense of saying, what are the benefits of this activity or that activity? What does that give you? How is that going to maybe benefit you in future, and how does that make you look and think slightly differently, so that you can still manage within the financial envelope? And that's why it's also looking and having a sustainability kind of lens when you're looking at some of the actions and activities that you're doing anyway. So, I mentioned tree planting. It turns out we had always planted quite a lot of trees. We're doing way more now, but actually that was something that wasn't necessarily new. It was something that just hadn't been considered as sustainability, to then measure and have those metrics and consider it for your long-term future capitals. So that's where I think finance has such a broad view of what goes on in a business, and I think finance inevitably has, Pierre is controlling, naturally financial people understand the world of governance, and they understand how to do that, why it's important, and what the benefits of that are. And I think when you have frameworks that are strong from a finance perspective, rolling those out then for sustainability targets or for other target setting, you just have a really core competency to be able to do that. But you can only do that if people really understand why you're doing it and what the benefit of it is. The finance team need to understand that and really believe that, so that they can take it to the business, because they just have so much access, I find.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you to both of you for all your responses and all the inspiring information that you've shared, and thank you to our audience for all those questions coming in and keeping our panelists on their toes. I'm going to pass briefly now over to Catherine, just to give you a little bit of background, just point you to our key resources on this topic. So that's thank you for me, and over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Helen, and thank you very much to our speakers. So I just wanted to briefly highlight some of the business benefits of integrating sustainability into your strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting process. So if we can show that slide, please, now. So I'm going to give you a moment to read that slide. And as you read through it, if you think about those benefits that are most important to your organisation, or maybe some of those benefits that you've already managed to realise. I hope you've been as inspired as I have by our speakers today, by the practical examples that they've given and the details they've given. If you'd like to find out more, then our essential guide to strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting has lots of tools, guidance and practical examples from our CFO Leadership Network on how to work towards integrating sustainability within your strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting processes. So if we show the next slide now, it shows some of the tools and guidance within the guide. As you'll see, split out into 4 key areas, which will look familiar to you. So process, governance, performance management, technology and data. So process is very much around integrating within strategic, operational and financial plans. Governance is thinking about integrating it into existing structures and cross-functional involvement, as you heard from our speakers today, very important. Performance management, so those getting the right metrics, monitoring the performance of both individuals and organisations, so making people accountable. Technology and data, so that capability to feed into the strategic cycle so that you have the right information at the right time and it is of appropriate quality. So the guide gives you lots more useful information for you to get a further understanding on this topic. But I would now like to finish on business benefits as I started. So if we could run that poll now on business benefits. So a multiple choice, so tick all of those that apply. And what do you think are the business benefits of integrating sustainability into strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting? So if we show those results now, please. And I'm glad to see that most people were picking out all of those different examples of benefits. And they are all correct. So I will hand it over to Nadine, who's just going to close out for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Louise, Pierre-Henri, thank you so much for this really interesting webinar. I saw the questions coming in and our participants were really, really interested in hearing all the practical details of your journey. So thank you so much for sharing this with us today. Catherine, Helen, thank you for holding space today and facilitating us through this really interesting discussion. And just to let you know, every one of you will receive a follow-up email, which will also include some of these resources Catherine mentioned to really help you to find the right tools and guidance for you and understanding what you personally can do in order to embed sustainability into your maybe strategic planning, budgeting and forecasting processes. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.